Hello, everybody. So I had a fan request to bring back this beautiful gentleman to do a follow-up interview with. Maybe you met him before, maybe this is your first time, but this is the wonderful Christopher Huerta. He is a beautiful, beautiful spiritual guide for other people. He's written a couple wonderful books. The one I introduced you to last time was his book, Coming Out Spiritually. It was originally published in the 90s and was listed as one of the best spiritual books of the year and very much focused on the queer experience. Since then, his focus has shifted a little bit. He had a new book come out recently, Awakening the Soul of Power, which I've just started reading, and it is absolutely lovely. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity for him to come back, talk more about his new book, talk more about how he's evolving, changing his own spiritual path, and then share some wonderful insights with you all. So, Christian, welcome back. It's such a pleasure to have you here today.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing great now. I get to hang out with you, my friend.
And you're wearing a shirt.
Well, I wanted to make sure that we matched. I figured you weren't going to show up shirtless today, so. So tell me all about your new book. Tell me about what inspired it, why now, why this, where did it come from?
Well, it was probably brewing in my head for about 10 years. And I think, what inspired it was, I'm one of 9 kids. And I have an older sister. I'm the second oldest. I'm the oldest male. My sister, when we were kids, and all of us are like together, like within 9 years and no twins. So my mom was pretty much pregnant for 12 years in a row. When we were kids, my sister was like a natural born. Like she would say, hey, let's all go do that. And we would just all naturally, not only the 9 of us or the 8 of us, but the entire neighborhood of, 15 kids would just, we did whatever she thought we wanted to do. And then she hit puberty and something happened. I don't know if it was something that somebody said to her that, little girls didn't behave in that way, but she turned that thing off. That natural leadership went out the window. And she assumed this kind of, Mother Teresa persona. And she's amazing. She's brilliant. But that always kind of like, I didn't really get that. And I started to realize over the years that most of us have an ambivalent relationship with power. That part of us wants it, and part of us is afraid of it. And I think the more that I've been thinking about this, okay, is that what we fear is that if we really step into all our power, into all of who we are, that other people wouldn't be able to handle it. And that we might end up rejected and alone, and that's no fun. Who wants that? I think we also fear that we might abuse it, and no wonder. How many abuses of power have each of us witnessed in our lifetimes? And then on top of that, we've been conditioned to believe that power is a bad thing. With quotes like "power corrupts," and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and who wants that? But what they didn't tell us about that quote is that Lord Acton was speaking specifically about political power, not personal power, which is what we're here to talk about. And so when you add to that mix the fact that we've all been conditioned to be afraid of our emotions, we've turned the emotions into weakness. When you put all that stuff together, what happens is that we end up giving away our power. We end up settling for less. We say yes when inside we really feel no. We override our beliefs, our preferences, our dreams, and settle for an illusion of acceptance, for a false sense of security, and for morsels of pseudo love. So it's not a good idea. It's not a good strategy.
I heartily second and celebrate everything that you said and completely agree. I had a moment in my own life, I would say about 3 or so years ago, where I was doing a practice. It's a Vajrayana Buddhist practice for the medicine Buddha. And in one of the parts, it's listing the different qualities of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. And one of the words that they mention for compassionate is powerful. And for whatever reason that day really hit me and saying, wow, I have discomfort with this word. I have discomfort with the idea of being powerful for the reasons that we've named, that in our culture right now don't, one, have a good discourse around the importance of healthy power. Um, but two, I haven't seen a lot of examples of it navigated well. I love the distinction you make between personal power and political power, but it's something that I felt very scared of embracing. And I know I still have my own journey to continue going on with embracing my personal power. But I can reflect back earlier on my journey and how safe victimhood felt for a while. Because, when we're a victim, well, then it's not my fault. It's other people's fault. They're the wrongdoers. But in accepting that label and carrying it like a badge of honor, you therefore relinquish all of your power. Everyone else has that power over you. And just realize that ultimately that doesn't serve one on their journey of healing, wholeness, and completion. So I celebrate everything you just said.
So you just kind of went for the jugular, in bringing in that word of victimization and victim consciousness, because I think that is probably the biggest obstacle, the reason that most of us hold on to feeling powerless, and we're talking about ultimate personal responsibility and accountability.
Yeah.
Because if we're holding, as long as we're holding somebody else or something else, whether it's what mom did or daddy didn't do, or the teacher, the minister, society, homophobia, sexism, racism, and not to deny that those things didn't happen or that the system isn't set up unfairly. It's not about denying any of that. But as long as we're something or somebody external to us responsible for our state of being, we just give our power away again,
Mm-hmm.
and often to the perpetrator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we can even extend that further to talk about historically how religion was used, right? That you're not taking personal agency for your growth and development and for your experience of life. It is something, God's in control. They're determining your fate. And even in contemporary culture, where we have become less theistic, where we've become less saying, oh, there's some person on a cloud determining our well-being, we as a culture have really leaned into conspiracy theories and the idea that there's some shadow government or some nefarious organizations who lizard people who are determining our fate. And it's the same thing, right? It's not taking accountability for your own agency, for your ability to have a quality life. Um, and I think a big part of that too is if we take responsibility for those things, then we also have to take responsibility for the parts we play of our own negativity, our own lack of self-inquiry, our own biases, and to say, well, those are all choices I'm making, whether I'm actively aware of it or not. I get to take control of both the good and the bad, and that's a heavy load when you haven't been doing some self-examining around why am I behaving the way I'm behaving? Why am I making the choices I am? Why do I do the things I do? And that can be ultimately very terrifying.
Yeah, we're no longer in little league now. Now we're talking the big kids game,
Exactly. Exactly.
and
So,
not easy. It's that's why I often refer to the hero's journey, because the way that we're talking about living, owning responsibility, like what was my role in it,
yeah.
looking at every aspect of it. What is making us do the things we do? That willingness to face our inner demons, to dive deep inside and ask these hard questions. What are my triggers? Why would this behavior trigger me when it doesn't bother the person next to me? And not to rationalize or excuse any of it, but it is about owning who we are, and that to me is the key to liberation and empowerment.
Yeah, I often use the term that, to walk a spiritual path is to be the path of a warrior, not because it's outward violence or, you have to be, look a certain way or have a certain kind of swagger about you, but a warrior in the sense that you have to be willing to face the complete annihilation of everything you think you are on a regular basis, that you have to be willing to strip away these tenets of who am I? Why do I behave this way? How does the world function? And to enter a liminal space, a space where things are not defined, where things are in transition, where things are complex and contradictory. And for people who like concrete, who like black and white, who like right and wrong and clearly defined commandments, That's a very uncomfortable space to be.
Yeah. Stuff up here is nothing less.
Absolutely. So how did you arrive in this place, or have you always been this way? Has this been an evolution for you,
Oh
or
my God, are you kidding me? Like, I am such an unlikely person to be speaking about and writing about heroism and personal empowerment. Like, I know self-doubt. I know self-hatred. My entire adolescence was one long depression with suicidal fantasies. Um, and so I know what I'm talking about. I know that it's possible to transform and transmute self-doubt into self-confidence because it's happened in me. And that's the path that I share in this book and in my retreats and in my workshops. It's like, how do you do that? And I know that it can happen. If it can happen to me, it can happen in anybody. And
yeah,
flash forward to today, like no matter what happens in my life, no matter the details, the circumstances, whether a relationship works out or it doesn't, whether a project succeeds or it fails, never, ever, ever do I question my sense of self. Like that is unshakable. And I know that that is available to all of us if we're willing to do the work and to look inside and take that heroic path.
would you say that that self-confidence and that self-reliance, that grit, tenacity, do you feel like that is something that grew out of being tested and having to go through difficult experiences? Or do you say that that's something that just kind of evolved in an easy, loving way where it's just like, oh, I woke up one day and suddenly I felt powerful?
No, definitely not. Time tested and which is good because I know I know the path. I know that it's not easy. I know that it's heroic. And I know that we can all navigate it and that we can all free ourselves and that we can find a way to own our own power in a way that is a match for us, right? That doesn't require that we push anybody down, step on them, or manipulate them. In order for us to feel powerful, we don't have to put our knee on anybody's neck in order for us to feel powerful. There's a different way to do that, um, and that's what the book is about. How do we do that?
I think that's a really great thing that you're highlighting this idea that owning your power does not take away anyone else's. That to be powerful is actually to create space for others to step into their own power and to recognize their own divinity, their own strength, their own magnificence. That I don't need to make you feel small or lesser, which is too often something we see in contemporary culture or throughout history that I break somebody else down to build myself up, or, it tends to unfortunately be a part of the more toxic masculine culture, right? Like I'm going to belittle you to make myself seem bigger. Um, but it doesn't have to be that way, that we all have space to thrive.
Exactly, and that's why I differentiate in the book between worldly power, the way that the world relates to power, and spiritual power or soulful power. And what you just pointed to is one of the key differences. You know, worldly power approaches it as a zero-sum game. So like you're having power takes away from mine. It's like, wait a minute, who says? Like if I'm in my power, if I know who I am, then why would I be threatened by you being in your power? It's like I know that no matter what life throws my way, I got this.
Yeah.
Which is maybe more of a vulnerable place to live because we've gotten confused, especially as men. You know, we walk around like these uncaring, unfeeling robots, and we think that's powerful. That's not power. That's like prison. Like to
Yeah.
walk around like this, it's prison.
Uh,
Um, and so what we're talking about is like a much more vulnerable, but yet much more empowered relationship to life, which is like, hey, life, I know you're gonna throw curveballs my way. That's the nature of life. And I know that no matter what happens, I'm gonna handle it. I know that I'm gonna land on my feet and handle it in a way that works for me.
yeah, the image that came to mind as you were saying that is like a suit of armor. Like at one moment it feels protective, but after you've walked around in it for a little bit, it becomes more of a burden than anything else.
And there's a price to pay for that, right? Like
Absolutely.
the book is for everybody. We all struggle with issues around power. Well, I don't know about making that absolute statement. Most of us, for the great majority of us, struggle with issues around power. So it's dedicated specifically for women, um, because the more that I've been thinking about this stuff, which answers, to talk about one of your questions you wanted to get into, how has my thinking evolved around all this? Today, I believe that the single most important thing that needs to happen in the world is the empowerment of women. And it's not to idealize women, it's not to put women up on a pedestal. Women also abuse power. And it's certainly not to give women more crap they have to clean up in this mess that we have all made of this world of ours. But it's because as a world, as a species, we've been running so off kilter, so off balance where it comes to the masculine and the feminine. And we've turned the feminine into weakness. It's like, my God, what a faulty way of looking at this. Um, and and so then we've all, and we've rejected the feminine in some ways. And if you want to talk about power, courage, resilience, let's talk about the power of creation that resides in the female body. And so, yes, I believe that when women are in 50% of power in this world, we're going to have a very different relationship to war and poverty and hunger and how we treat the environment and homophobia. Because if you look at the religions, the cultures that persecute LGBTQ people, 100% correlation, those are the same ones where women are less than equal.
Right.
So homophobia and misogyny, two sides of the same coin. And I believe that misogyny is really the deeper one. Um,
Absolutely.
and yet, in addition, so without minimizing the price that women have paid in these last several thousand years of the patriarchy, which is more about power over, and my way or the highway and this cowboy mentality, men have also paid a price for that. And if you look at, for example, the longevity numbers in the U.S., women outlive men by 5 years. If you look at those numbers globally, it's 7 years. And if you look at the rate of suicide, and for that I only have U.S. numbers, um, men commit suicide 4 times as frequently as
Yeah.
women do. And if you look at the numbers more carefully, 70% of the suicides in the US are committed by middle-aged white men,
Yeah.
which are still, I think, pretty inarguably the group that controls the majority of the power, that holds the majority of the power in the world. And so, what's up with that? Wouldn't we think that the group that holds the majority of the power would have more privilege and therefore have a better quality of life and live longer? But that's not the case. And what is that? And it connects to what we are talking about before. Like we've got this mistaken and limited and limiting view of what it means to be a man, as we've labeled this way of living, this robotic existence, to be masculine. It's like, wait a minute, really?
100%. This is the topic of my next book that I'm working on right now, is everything that you're just talking about. And I love this idea of misogyny and homophobia being two sides of the same coin, because at its root, the issue with homosexuality for certain people is you're resigning your status as a man to be something lesser. And we see this in cultures who, if you are the sexual partner who's the one doing the penetrating, well, then you're not gay. There's nothing wrong with that. If you allow yourself to be the submissive partner, the penetrated partner, then that's the issue. Then you're the one who's resigning your status because you become the proverbial female counterpart, and that's less good than being a man. Whereas if we saw the masculine and feminine as true equals, then it doesn't matter how you express yourself. It doesn't matter how you play on the gender and sexuality and sex spectrums. You just are playing with all the colors. And to your point about how being a man is so limited now, is the fact that it's telling men that there's only a small segment of that which makes you you that you are allowed to present to the world. Your emotions, your tenderness, your compassion, your sensitivity, your artistry, your softness, all of that, which we all have to varying degrees, you have to forsake. And
Yes,
who can live well, who can live in a whole way when huge chunks of who they are is being asked to disappear?
exactly, exactly. And it's funny, somebody I heard this story about Betty White, who left us last year. And apparently she was in one of those group interviews where multiple celebrities were being interviewed at the same time, and somebody said something about having balls. And she goes, wait a minute, where do we get this association between courage and strength and having balls? You thump those little things, and the guy collapses, bends over in pain.
Yeah.
You want to talk courage and strength and resilience? Let's talk vaginas. Those things take a pounding.
Yes, I love that. And it's so absolutely true. But we look at the colloquialisms that we use, right? Like, oh, that takes a lot of balls to do that, or telling a young guy, don't be a pussy.
Yeah.
Right? Like the implications of that. I was reading a story recently about this young kid on a sports team where the coach basically called him out. He's like, "Oh, you're such a pussy, you couldn't do this." And his response was, if people started to think of me in that way, it would be devastating. Not like, oh, that'd be uncomfortable, but like my identity would fall apart if people
That's it.
thought of me this way. And I think that's why a lot of young men in particular really struggle with coming out, is this feeling of loss of status, this feeling of I'm worthless in the eyes of society if I don't fulfill the traditional tropes and roles that I've been told I have to express. And how liberating it becomes for all of us when we start to question any sort of boxing in, any sort of limitations of who we are, and to say, wait a minute, I've become complicit in this. I'm giving up my power. I'm giving up the totality of me to play a role that has been foisted upon me, often without my agreement. And when I
Or
reject that,
evaluation.
what was that?
Or often without agreement, or even evaluating it, even like analyzing
Yeah,
it. Like we just take it for granted because that's the way that we told it was. We were
yeah,
told it was, and we didn't even question it.
right. And the value of an examined life is that
Yeah.
if you just keep following the scripts society gives you, I can't tell you the number of men that I work with as a coach, and I'm sure you're the same, who they reach a certain point in life, usually in their 50s or 60s, where they say, I did everything I was supposed to do. I had this amazing career. I won these awards. I got this salary. I built this house. I had these kind of relationships, and I'm absolutely miserable.
Yeah.
I did everything society told me to do. And now I'm at this point where there's no longer instructions for me to follow. And I realize all the things that I was following along that I unwittingly agreed to didn't lead to happiness. It didn't lead to contentment. Where the hell do I go now?
Yeah. Men and women. Men
Yes.
and women for sure. And how many more examples do we need? People who have all the money you could ever want, all the power you could ever want, and they're miserable.
Yeah.
The rate of suicide and addictions in our celebrity cultures and our it's like it's
Oh, there.
disproportionate.
Well, and let's talk about too. We were differentiating between political power and personal power. I'll also throw in their social capital because I think that is a form of political power. That a lot of times these people who go to the extraordinary lengths that is required to achieve that, because there isn't, I think, with probably very few exceptions, there is no achieving great societal status and power, political power, without a tremendous amount of sacrifice. Whether that sacrifices your own soul or relationships or things that were really meaningful to you that you have to give up a ton to be able
Privacy.
to achieve it. Absolutely. That often the very reason you're seeking that political power is to supplant your own lack of feeling worthy, your own personal power, that you don't feel you're good enough. You don't feel like you have the agency to thrive in this space. But if I take over this space, maybe I'll feel okay. And I don't like to name names, but I think the quintessential example of this is Donald Trump. Like, look at somebody who quite literally attained the office of the most powerful man in the United States, and still routinely demonstrated and demonstrates insecurity, needing to dominate and subjugate others because they feel threatened, because, having to boast and brag about things that often are not accurate to compensate for this feeling of not feeling truly powerful, despite having quite literally the largest accolade you could be given, to be elected the president of the United States.
Absolutely. And it has nothing to do with which party he's a part of. And I've written about this because I find it that it's really a fascinating phenomenon. that he is so thin-skinned. And so I spend, I do a lot of different retreats on different themes, conscious relationships, what that means, so that they have a chance of working, personal empowerment. I work with women, women's empowerment specifically, life purpose, and LGBTQ theme retreats. Common to all of them are two things, like the two common denominators. Breath work, because I've yet to come across any healing modality that heals as quickly and as efficiently and as powerfully and at as many levels as it does. The other thing that I always teach is the ego. Because if we want to have relationships that have a chance of working, or a life that is filled with meaning and purpose and a sense of personal empowerment, we've got to understand the ego mind. And there's so much confusion about that, and we don't have time to really dive into it. But to me, that is the way that Trump really serves us. He's like the ego to the max. He's like showing us what it looks like, so that we can all learn from it and hopefully land on a better way of living.
Yeah. And not to be duly unfair, that I think most people we see in the public eye struggle with, living in that egoistic state. He's just, I think, a very evident example of somebody doing that. I think a lot of other people are able to hide it a lot more and not be so obvious about it. But it's something that is common for so
Yeah,
many
and we
people,
all have one.
most people.
It's part of the
Absolutely.
human condition. We all have an ego. And
Absolutely.
so he is showing us like the worst expression of it, so that
Yeah.
we can learn what it looks like and come up with a different way of living, which is what you and I are also talking about in our work.
And for myself too, and I know this is a common experience for almost everyone, and it's part of our biological programming, but I can get 50 beautiful comments on a post I make and get like that one person who leaves a comment that's even, slightly critical or negative. And what is the one that affects me? It's not the tens of beautiful ones before. And I get that's part of our brain programming, right? Like it's part of our survival mechanisms in our head that said, oh, there was a tiger over there once. Make sure you're aware that a tiger lives over there. Focus on that so you
Yeah.
don't die. But it doesn't serve us well in this world to constantly dwell on it. And then going back to what we've been saying, the importance of examining why are we responding the way we are? Why are we behaving as we do? Why are we the people that we are? And can we consciously choose to shift that?
Yes, exactly.
And so this takes us back to what started this conversation is your observation about your sister. That as she entered puberty, which is a time where people become more aware, generally speaking, of societal pressures and how we're expected to behave, you saw your sister being somebody who natively was very powerful and empowered in herself, choosing to give that up to supposedly fulfill a societal role that would make her more acceptable as a potential sexual partner, as a member of adult society, that there was a role that she adopted that you felt was inauthentic to how you had experienced her hitherto. Is that correct?
Yes, and I'm not saying that the way she's expressing now is inauthentic. I think that there's more religious, giving persona, more, call it Mother Teresa persona, even though she's not celibate, she's definitely not a nun, has 5 kids, uh, but but at the cost of suppressing part of who she is. So it goes back to what you were talking about before. If we want to reach wholeness, we have to reclaim all these parts of our rejected humanity, not just sexual expression. In some cases, our spirituality, we've tried to reject that,
Yeah.
understandably. Um, but if but which is a really interesting way to think about the word integrity too, right? Because we think of having integrity as something that has to do with morality or doing the right thing, um, and yet integrity comes from that same word as integer, whole number. So
Exactly.
integrity is about wholeness, about reclaiming all parts of who we are, and there's our there's our fulfillment in expressing that fully.
I was having a conversation recently where someone was pitting against their sexual expression and their sense of integrity and saying that they were opposites and how do I find balance? And I pointed out to him exactly what you were saying, which is, well, if you want to behave with integrity, you have to be integral with yourself. Like to cut parts of yourself off means you're not living with integrity. You have to learn to accept all of
Exactly.
what you are. I want to just share a quick little anecdote myself for anyone who's listening and is maybe reflecting on your own experience and saying, wow, I notice I don't live up to this. That I notice that there are times where I don't behave well in regards to these things. I want to just share a moment that I had not too long ago that made me realize that I too struggle with these things. I was working out at the gym and we were living near an Air Force base, so it was a lot of military people who would work out there. And there was this woman, probably in her early to mid 50s, and I don't know her sexual orientation. I'm going to guess she was a lesbian, but I don't know. But she presented very masculinely, and she was very into, it seemed based on her little workout journal and the way she interacted at the gym, is getting as physically large as possible, which is something we typically associate with men. And I remember hearing a thought in my head saying, gosh, why would any woman want that? Why would any woman want to be physically large? Like, you should want the opposite, to be as petite and as small as possible. And I stopped myself. I wasn't saying this out loud. I was just thinking in my head, but I stopped myself and, you know, chuckled because that's the only thing I could do is saying, wow, way to go and reinforce gender stereotypes, Galen. Way to go and say, oh, yeah, men should be big and take up space, and women should be delicate and small and easy to throw around. And it's like, fuck, this is the work you do every day, and you're having these biased gender thoughts. So I just want to say, if we all do it, we all do it.
I think it's almost impossible to live in the world that we live in and not have even tendrils, some layers of sexism or racism or homophobia, because that's what we live and breathe.
Yeah,
I've been writing and teaching about this stuff for 30 something years, for 33 years. And if some years ago I went to Spain with a friend, and I was driving through Spain and noticing all these stores, restaurants and bookstores and cafes with the names of my siblings. So I decided my mom was having a big birthday. I forget which one it was. So I decided I was going to make a collage of of these places of business with all her children and grandchildren. And it wasn't until I came back to the States and I was telling my former partner about it that it dawned on me that I had included the heterosexually married partners, but not my own partner of 7 years. So it goes to show how insidious and how subtle these things can be. And so, yeah, I don't think it's necessary to kick ourselves again and to punish ourselves and self-flagellate when we notice these. It's a journey. And having that moment of clarity, that moment of realization, where you just happen to see, oh my God, this thought that popped into my head, which doesn't even make it real. It's just a thought that popped into our heads in that moment. But we become more and more and more conscious, and we can have more and more choice about even what we think about and what we believe.
and why it's so important to take that next step of examining it. Because
Yes.
if we don't examine it, then we're just going to operate on those scripts that society says.
Exactly.
I was having a conversation with my husband last night that I'll talk about it, even though it makes me uncomfortable that I'm having this experience. But I was watching on Twitter some clips where the night before Philadelphia was experiencing several like mass break-ins of stores, Lululemon, Apple, where dozens of people were coordinating at the same time, breaking in to steal stuff. And I was saying to my husband, it makes me really frustrated that everybody seen in these videos were black, who were breaking into the stores, because it's making me have those thoughts of, well, of course they were. Of course that was the group that was breaking in and doing it. And saying, it's really unfair because, yes, I know all the or I'm aware of the social determinants of well being that are causing people to behave this way and the systems that are continued in our culture with education and, you know, health and the horrible prison system. Like, I get all of that. But how short of a leap is it to go from, well, look at the type of people that are breaking in, we need to be tough on crime, and I should elect certain people who are going to be tough on those people, and all the people who look like this are going to behave this way, and they need to be, and just saying, whoa, if I didn't stop to pause and start examining these narratives, it would be very easy for me to start walking down a certain track that I do not want to walk down. But how many people will absorb news every day, news stations that have an agenda to make you think a certain way,
Yes.
to
Yes.
create fear or anger or an assortment of very intense and not usually helpful emotions to navigate you into a certain thought pattern, a certain political ideology, a certain faction that makes you feel a certain way about other people, whether those other people are racial minorities or immigrants or people of a certain gender expression or sexuality, whatever, that if you don't stop and think, why? What? Let me examine this deeper. How very easy it is to just take those next steps.
Yeah. I mean, and that's even without the intention of causing separation. There's so much conditioning that's already implicit.
Mm-hmm.
And then add to that what you're talking about, those certain organizations, institutions, people who are consciously fomenting separation and otherizing others. Like I saw a cartoon recently, and had three people sitting around the table. One was like a really, like a one percenter, white guy, dressed really well and very rich looking clothing. There was a worker, blue collar worker, light skinned. Okay, so the rich guy had like a plate of cookies in front of him. The the worker, the blue type, the white blue, blue collar type, had one cookie, and he was staring at his one cookie. And the third person was, dark skinned person, had no cookies. And the rich guy says to the one cookie guy, "Be careful, they're coming for your cookie." And that's the system, the way the system is set up to cause separation and keep us at each other. And it has to do with power. It has to do with who power structures.
Yes. And this idea of, are we living in, and this is something you've already touched on, but are we living in a finite universe where there's only so much and I've got to battle you for my allotment? Or are we living in a place of abundance where it says there is more than enough for everybody? But if you're approaching things with a mindset that is limited and restricted, then you're going to feel like there isn't enough to go around. But if you're approaching this with a mindset to say, I can get all of my needs met, and so can you. I can own all my power, and you can own all your power. And it's not a zero sum game. There is more than enough where we can all succeed. Then it changes the dynamics. But, you know, it, that sort of narrative doesn't generate clicks. It doesn't generate income for news
Yeah,
stations. Like
yeah,
it, to have a nuanced discourse on, you know, how we can all mutually thrive isn't going to generate the some sort of social capital, or I'm sorry, physical capital through the way that we are monetized in this culture
yeah.
to garner enough interest.
Yes. And by the way, Kate, before we move on too far from it, I really want to acknowledge and honor you for being so vulnerable and disclosing, these thoughts that popped into your head. Because I think we all have them. It's this, like I was saying, it's part of what's in the fabrics of society. And just because the thought pops into our head, that doesn't mean that we have to buy into it or
Yeah,
live from that place. And the heroic journey, right? The examine life, asking ourselves why we do the things we do, and where did this belief come from, and do I really want to invest in that belief?
yeah, yeah. This whole mentality of my shit don't stink doesn't help anybody, right? And
Hmm.
that's, you know, as much as I believe in us moving in a direction that is more equitable and more fair and more sustainable, which tends to agree more with progressive ideology, I'm not a huge fan of the perfectionism of that movement, or that idea of if you ever did something that is imperfect, then you are no longer eligible. Like you have to be pristine, and to say, no, we all do shit. We all make mistakes. We all have uncomfortable thoughts. We all evolve on issues. And to have grace and space to hold and say, yeah, I wrangle with things that are uncomfortable. I wrangle with things I'm not proud of. I have things that are not nice. And that's okay because that is part of being human. And whenever we set ourselves up as being perfect or enlightened or having everything figured out, you know, that's just a fallacy. No
Yeah,
one is that way.
yeah, yeah. Those are the teachers I worry about. The ones who claim that they have completely enlightened and have transcended all of their humanness and their egoic nature. It's a journey. It's a journey.
And
And
honestly, I
to
think
me,
that's what
that's
makes like,
what I look for the most in a credible teacher is humility. And it's part of being human. And if you want to talk perfectionism, I don't think there is such a thing as perfection. Um, and to me, perfectionism is really overcompensating for not feeling good enough. So there's a part of us that doesn't feel adequate, or that and that feels like there's something wrong with us. We're too much of this, not enough of that. Stuff that we have misheard and misinterpreted from childhood, and yet thoughts and beliefs about ourselves that were too intense, too difficult to accept. So we suppress them and
yeah,
throw them into the shadow in the back of the closet somewhere. But that stuff doesn't go away just because we don't want to look at it. And so we overcompensate in the case of perfectionism. We have to prove to ourselves and to the world that we are good enough. And yet, that part of us is insatiable. So
yeah.
there's no amount of worldly success. So again, referencing he who shall not be named, because he exemplifies that too. Like there's
Yeah.
no amount of worldly success that would ever be enough.
The other side of that paradigm of it never being enough is to examine it as being a wonderful opportunity. One of my favorite quotes is the difference between an ordeal and an adventure is one's perspective. And to is say, if perfectionism is an illusion, then you will never arrive at a completely 100% healed and enlightened and integrated state, but there's nothing else to learn. Then, my goodness, what a wonderful adventure this is. That means there's always going to be something else to learn. There's going to always be something else I can uh, continue to improve on and work on and grow into. And that makes me have a reason to get up every day. Because if I had everything solved, then why am I still here? What's the point? Why not just go float away on a little cloud?
How
Like the fact
boring
that
would it be?
yeah, the fact that we get to evolve. What a gift that is. What a gift our imperfections are. And that's something I often refer to is that we are perfectly imperfect. Like that
Yeah.
in the discord, in the discomfort, in the moments that are messy, there is still sacredness and beauty
Oh
in
my
that.
God, yes. And
If we can see
magnificent.
it.
Magnificence. And so the journey to be is not to become perfect, but to find those little places inside of us that tell us those little lies, those little misunderstandings that tell us that we're not good enough. And that stuff can be healed. That to me,
One
that's the magic of this healing work. Then we can choose to excel and to express that magnificence as much as we want to, but without the need to prove it. There's nothing to prove.
Amen. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing too, right? Often the people who are genuinely the most powerful are often the most humble. That I don't need to prove anything to you because I'm confident in it.
Yeah. Which goes back to the conversation about power. Worldly power is has an agenda and is always trying to grab something for itself, and it's always self-aggrandizing. So it's always blowing itself up to seem bigger than it actually is. And again, no need to mention any more names. Whereas contrasting that with what I call spiritual power, like think of a Gandhi or a Gandalf from the Lord of the Rings, and their
Love
simple
that.
monastic robes, their sandal feet. For looking at them from the outside, you would never know how
Yeah.
much power they hold. But when it's necessary, step out of the way. Um, Gandhi brought the British Empire to its knees when it was at its highest point in terms of global reach and influence. And he did that without ever shooting a gun or landing a single punch. Talk about power.
Walk gently, but carry a big stick. Speaking of women who have demonstrated power, well, one of my favorite speakers on the topic of spirituality and maturation is Elizabeth Lesser. I first discovered her through her TED Talks and then read some of her books. And one of the ideas that she spoke on that has stayed with me since is when we do this self reflective work and we become aware of the influences within us and playing upon us, is that when we're dealing with pressure, when we're dealing with the discomfort, when we're dealing with heartbreak, when we're dealing with these uncomfortable things, that there's this idea that that pressure can do one of two things for us. The pressure can shut us down, or we become more entrenched, more afraid, more angry, or that pressure can crack us open. It can be like cracking of an egg. And as Rumi says, the pain is where the light enters you, right? Those cracks create an opening that we're able to then move past our traditional boundaries and become something so much more. And when we're willing to lean into the discomfort, when we're willing to examine the whys and the hows and the whats of who we are and what's going on, and to really sit with that, that pain can be a wonderful catalyst for growth and evolution. And this goes back to, I think, one of the first questions I asked you during this conversation is, has your growth and maturation come from the discomfort? Has it come through the uncomfortable situations? Has it come from that warrior path of going to battle, but battling most often with yourself rather than anybody else?
We know. Well, growth doesn't happen in the comfort zone, unfortunately. It just doesn't. That's the trap of comfort, that we become stagnant. We plateau and settle. Um, for better or worse, growth happens in like beyond the comfort zone. We have to stretch beyond the limits of where we feel comfortable, in order for growth to happen. And just to say it, it's kind of implicit in the conversation, but yes, what we're talking about is incredibly difficult. This path of empowerment and freeing ourselves, is challenging, it's heroic, and incredibly, indescribably rewarding. It is so worth it because the compensation for it, the reward, the light at the end of the tunnel is freedom.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, being willing, I mean, like analyzing, diving into why we do the things we do and why we believe the things we do, it's a work of a lifetime, and it's not easy work, but it is so worthwhile. So I cannot encourage people enough to dive in. It's well worth it.
To contradict myself and to challenge what you just said a little bit, I want to ask you if you agree with the following statement. Because I've been somebody throughout my life who always echoed similar sentiments, right? Like growth is uncomfortable, that, you got to lean into the pain, that's how you evolve and grow. One of the things that I've also been trying to accept, and I'm also a big believer that opposites are often true. It's one of the lessons of spiritual polarity that if this side is true, so is this, even if they seem in direct opposition. One of the things I've been trying to accept in my own spiritual journey is also how growth can happen easily and effortlessly, especially when in the presence of love. And how much I've watched in my own life, for example, the love of my partner, how his expansive, pretty darn close to unconditional love has helped me evolve and grow and open in ways that I never allowed myself, in a way that has been juicy and beautiful and expansive. Yes, like maybe moving into zones where I didn't used to occupy, zones that I formerly felt uncomfortable, but that growth doesn't just have to happen through pain, it can also happen through love. What's your response to that?
I think it's a beautiful way of holding it. I mean, from my interpretation of what you're saying is that the blessing, the gift of that relationship in which you find yourself, which is one of unconditional love, as close as we can get to it, creates an environment in which growth can happen more gracefully. But I don't think it takes away the work
Mm.
that you do. I think even what you've exhibited today, the willingness to look at your thoughts and these feelings that may come up in us, that takes work. And I don't think there's any way around it. And yeah, much better if we can have a setting which is supportive and loving. Yes, by all means, let's have that. And I don't know that it takes away the effort part of the growth. Otherwise, everybody would be,
Absolutely.
liberated and free if it was that easy.
Yeah. And I just want to highlight the idea too that, even if today we are discussing ideas that sound really complex and seem really like, wow, you've done a lot of work to be able to get to this point that you're having these conversations and leaning into these things, is, I can guarantee you that years from now, I might look back at this conversation and cringe at some of the things I've said because saying, wow, you really did not do a good job. Like, woof, in the interceding years, you've grown so much more in this. And so to say that we are all works in progress and that,
I do.
wherever we are at this moment, like I hope to be able to say, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now, wow, look how far you've come.
Oh my
And
God, yeah.
this,
By all
you know,
means, it's like I had to struggle with that, and I struggle with that in writing a book, for example. It's like I know when as soon as it goes to the printer, my thinking is going to evolve around it. So it's like, well,
yeah,
just accept it.
been there. I was rereading my first book and I was like, oh shit, why did the hell did I wrote that? My opinions have changed so much in interceding 2 3 years. So
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah.
So Christian, it is always such a joy to get to hang out with you. You are such a beautiful man inside and out. You're one of those people who I just hold as somebody who just glows with this vast internal light and are such a beautiful guide and guardian of the path for others. And it's such an honor to get to interact with you and to share some space with you and share some ideas with you. Do you have any final thoughts, messages, questions, ideas, parting gifts you want to leave with us today?
All right. Well, first of all, thank you. And thank you for having me, and thank you for um, that beautiful acknowledgement, which is very moving, very heartwarming. And it takes one to know one, right? That's the nature of projection is we don't project just the bad qualities, we also project the good ones. So right back at you, brother. And I don't know that I have any final words other than do it. Like, right? Just it is so worth it. And we're all needed now. Right? We're all hands on deck. And the single most important thing that we can do um, is to fulfill our unique human potential. There isn't anybody out there who has the same genetics, the same set of experiences that make each one of us unique. If we don't give expression to that, ain't nobody else going to do it. Um, and we're living in the most critical juncture in the evolution of humanity, I think. I think we're in make it or break it time. The planet will be fine. It might take millions and millions of years, but life will continue in some form.
Yeah.
Consciousness will continue evolving. Maybe at the end, it's an enlightened cockroach planet. Who knows? Whether we make it, right? That's what we're just beginning to witness, what we have unleashed on our environment. And
The,
so when I look at it from that perspective, it's like all hands on deck. We are all needed now, and that means all of us, and all of us as fully as possible, bringing forth as much as we can, and to be that beacon in these challenging times.
But it certainly would be a hardier population if it was all enlightened cockroaches. They're much more stable than we are as humans. Like
Yes,
we get sunburned, we get cut. Those little fuckers, you can do anything to them, they'll be fine.
exactly,
Uh, no,
exactly.
to your point too, right? That if we want to take the next step as a civilization, it's not just one or two or three people in a community that can take those steps towards peace, acceptance, compassion, tranquility, love. Like it has to be a communal effort. And, there's that old adage that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. This idea that we all need to do our part. We all need to do our own work because when we respond negatively, when we see the anger, when we see the fear, when we see the frustrations creeping up in society, it's never about somebody else. It's a reflection of our own work that we need to continue to do to heal. And when we can take responsibility for that, then we're able to create that change within ourselves and move forward together. And so everyone needs to be on this mission as much as possible.
Yes, amen.
Uh, my brother, is there anything you want to plug? Any upcoming retreats or workshops or anything at all that you want, or how people can engage with you if they would love more?
Thank you for asking that. The book is available wherever books are sold. And by the way, endorsed by Gloria Stefan, the one and only. And so you can get it on your local bookstore if you want to support them, or you can order it on Amazon or other online stores. In terms of reaching me, probably my website's the best way, and that's soulful power. They can get access to my social media. They can find out. I'm just starting doing live events again, so I do have a retreat coming up on life purpose in December in California. I've started a year-long coaching program that's virtual that people might be interested in, that addresses all these themes that we've been talking about. And I look forward to hearing from you and to staying connected with you, my beautiful brother.
Oh, it's always such a pleasure, Christian. Thank you so much for your time, your heart, and your spirit. We are all better people from getting to listen to you and getting to share your space. So thank you so much for showing up for us.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day.